We have some questions popping up in the chat that I want us to get to, but just as a final maybe piece here, you know, we're 100 rural women were gathered here this morning to kind of talk about that intersection between, you know, women's issues, rural issues, and broadband. And so I'm seeing some, you know, pieces here in the chat that are asking, you know, what's the status of broadband in tribal communities? I'm seeing too, you know, some comments here. Thank you, Nicole, about talking about being a nurse educator in Bemidji. Your tribal students have the hardest time with connections. And so, you know, knowing that also rural looks so different and women have also so many different components of these identities too. I'll pose it first to Bernadine and Tina. Where do you see, and when you listen to your farmer co-ops, when you listen to your broadband communities, where are you seeing firsthand some of these pieces of how does broadband access make this particularly a women's issue, or how is it felt through also the lens and eyes of being women?
You want to go first?
Sure. So the beautiful thing about broadband is that, as I said, everything's better with broadband. And so you can, you know, whoever it is that you're working, you know, talking to, it's always easy to find a connection to their life. But women, because they're at the center of homes and communities, obviously are super impacted. And I'm thinking just about the parents, you know, who had to support their children during the lockdown, and people found themselves suddenly at home with their kids, trying to work themselves and support their kids in distance learning. And all of you here who are parents understand that, you know, the challenges of quality distance learning, online distance learning, and what a difference that makes to women. Healthcare, I mean, it's the thing about broadband is it touches everything. Healthcare, telemedicine, including mental health, and we know mental health has been such a challenge for COVID, and the ability now to deliver and receive mental health services online, it makes a tremendous difference to women that are trying to support their families and their organizations. Businesses are also, it's another great example, women entrepreneurs. And we've seen some amazing stories of through COVID, how women's businesses, by moving online and taking advantage of the global marketplace that's available at the other end of your mouse click, are able to run their businesses from home. I'll stop there, Tina, and pass it to you. What can you add?
Yeah, this is like a webinar in itself. I feel like women make the world go round. In the middle of, I guess in the spring last year, a year ago, probably exactly this time, I have 3 little boys, little, second grade, kindergarten, and a 1-year-old, right? So at the beginning of the pandemic, the discussion I had with my husband was it was really like, what the hell are we gonna do? Is our kid gonna learn to read, or am I gonna go to work? It was very hard discussions like that, and the default parent tends to be the woman. And just thinking about what women have dealt with over the last year, and if you don't have access to the internet, given everything everybody's been through this past year, you're having really difficult conversations at home. One of our farmer owners here in Minnesota, her default daily situation for her kids was to load the kids in a minivan and go drive to the Land O'Lakes plant in Melrose, park there, get access to the free Wi-Fi so her kids could do Zoom school, 3 in a car with headphones on. And then, I don't know how many of you are moms with young kids, but take pictures of the damn assignments and upload them on all those different platforms we had to use at that time. It has been a nightmare. And I just think if you don't have access, you're behind. Now on healthcare, some of the statistics there, and we're still learning and getting the data. Mayo Clinic, Health Partners, and Centricare are all members of the coalition I mentioned. And all of them have the same data point, and it's that they saw more telehealth visits in one day than they had in all of 2019 combined, right? So the explosion of telehealth was off the charts. Now, some of that too on the mental health side, particularly as it relates to rural communities, they've seen no-show rates for appointments drop precipitously because you're not walking into a mental health appointment to go see a counselor when your neighbor or your cousin or somebody you know is sitting at the front desk checking you in, right? So you have a sense of privacy that you didn't have before, and we're hearing that from our members too. There's a lot here, but it's really the economics of the situation and how this has impacted families and women in particular. And I see in the chat the statistic about the women leaving the workforce in 2020. We're going to feel that for a long time.
Great. Thanks, Tina and Bernadine, for helping us draw in that picture there too. And I want to make sure we can get to the audience Q&A. So Erica, I'm going to pass the mic to you. I know you've been moderating that chat. So.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. There's a lot of questions in here, and because we've had such a rich discussion, I'm not sure we're going to get to all of them. So I apologize in advance for not getting to all the questions we have, but I'm going to start just, someone asked Bernadine to say a little bit more about the Barbara Jor Klein story and what she did in the sewer. Do you want to just expand on that a little bit?
So, Barbara, I also saw it as it went running by that Mickey Morissetti, who's here with us from Minnesota Women's Press, asked also about the LTD. And Barbara, you know, I'd like to just toss it to you because the response to the LTD crisis is a great example of your role in LISSEUR, as you say, and maybe you can explain to the rest of us too a little bit more about LTD and its impact.
Well, the issue really is barriers to access, and that is the FCC. My house sits in frontier telephone territory. So when I found out my neighbors had BevCom through a state grant, I found out I couldn't access that project because I'm in frontier telephone territory. Those telephone territories need to go away. They're just ridiculous that they're any kind of a gap. So when we did a grant through Border to Border for the rest of my township, but we couldn't do the CenturyLink territory because CenturyLink stood up at our public meeting and said, no, we're going to challenge you. Don't come into our telephone territory. So part of Darien Township isn't done because they're a different telephone company, really. And then the second thing that's come up is all these federal dollars coming down. And I have no personal thing against LTD. But the fact that a small amount of federal dollars can come in and knock you out of state dollars and coordinating efforts is ridiculous. Our 2 border-to-border applications were turned down because there are census tracts that have 3 households that are funded through this potential, maybe in the future, LTD grant. We are completely locked out of moving ahead now because of this FCC RDOF project, which is a very scattered approach to funding broadband. So those are the things that need to, it's very similar to healthcare in that the providers are driving the train and the FCC has some barriers that the state is paying attention to and letting them block us out. We're trying to, and I've talked to LTD myself. Our providers are talking to LTD. They've set up an enormous barrier to moving ahead for us, and that has got to be addressed.
So Barbara, I would just add to explain that what's going on here is that the federal government awarded this company, it happens to be a Minnesota-based company, LTD,
yep,
a ton of money to build. They said they're going to build a fiber fiber feed network, which is what we need and want in Minnesota. Fiber is future proof. They have never built fiber before. They're a wireless provider. And so the concern is that they underbid this and that the money that they're going to get it is not enough to really build the fiber network they promised. And they may either be defaulted or disqualified. But in the meantime, the big concern, this is a public policy issue like us all to be aware of here on the call, is that so what informs our public policy? Is it like fear and a lack of abundance, or is it abundance? So all this effort is spent to prevent overbuild. This is what people are concerned about is, oh, we're going to give federal dollars to a place that's already been funded. LTD's been funded to build a fiber network, and so nobody else can get money to build a network because they've got 6 years to build it. And there's a lot of resources spent to ensure that privately held companies don't have to compete to publicly funded projects. And this overbuild concern is what has stopped the LTD. So with LTD's footprint on our map now, no more federal or state dollars can come into that space. So that's where we're at. On that.
Yeah, I'd like to just take this a step further. So to just explain how this works, and I know Barbara and Bernadine know, and Christy, there are a lot of people on this call that know a lot more than I do, but I'm going to try and summarize here. So an organization like LTD or others, they get the federal subsidy. So what happens is they get that through a reverse auction system. So they bid low and they say that they can deliver these services to this huge geography. The subsidy, the way this is set up, is it goes essentially to the lowest bidder. They then get the money. Bernadine mentioned they get all these years to build this out and deploy it. But then what happens is after they deliver this, they get they self-report. They self-report their success or where they have established connectivity to the government, to the FCC. That then goes into a map that the FCC manages. So what really happens is when they self-report and say, yep, we covered this whole census block, right, which is huge. It's a big, wide geography. Now, what Barbara mentioned is, in reality, they only delivered the service to 3 households.
Right.
But they get to self-report and say they brought it to the whole census block.
Right.
So then what this does then is it's just it exacerbates the problem, because this is the data that goes into the map that shows where broadband is throughout the entire country. So nobody, the federal government, nobody has a good sense or a finger on the pulse of the data today of where we have broadband connectivity and where we don't. That's why you see these grassroots things popping up, like Teresa in the chat put in the speed piece for Minnesota, right? Test My IT. So we can start to populate these maps from the grassroots. There was a bill that was passed and funded within the last year, $65 million to really rethink how the federal government does this map. That's one of the first steps to understand where the problem is. Now, the other thing that happens here is after FCC uses these existing maps, nobody else can go into those locations and provide service because it's not cost effective. There's no subsidy left, so it blocks competition. So this is a really complicated policy and political issue that's being hashed out in real time right now. This group is living it. Christy is right in the middle of it.
Well, I just want to add one more thing is this last week and this week, we're focusing on this new state dollars, CARES Act dollars, state of Minnesota, another part of the deed office has the dollars. The only way, and the deadline to apply is June 1st. The only way we can apply is if we bring LTD into the picture. Our providers down here are talking to each other, trying to figure out, is there any way that we can get an application in to fund those 2 that were turned down last year if we bring LTD into the mix by June 1st. So there's another pot of money in Minnesota by June 1st that most places will not be able to apply for.
Benny, if I could just though punctuate there, the action opportunity here for all of us on this call and everybody that we know is to take that speed test. So I'm glad to know it's in the chat box. That's super helpful, and share that out. And the more data points we can get to build our own citizen generated map in Minnesota, the better information our legislators will have to make decisions. So that's a great action everybody can take away and do today and feel like you've made a positive difference.
Yeah. Thanks, Bernadine. And you know, I'm glad we're talking about those numbers, because even if, you know, I guess maybe to begin for those who might be new to, you know, broadband, right? The FCC data says that that only 65% of rural Americans have access to high-speed fixed service. I know there was a question in the chat of how does this impact also tribal communities when you look at tribal lands, and this is still just through FCC data. That number drops down to 60% having access. And as we're hearing from, you know, Tina's comments here, that number is like highballing it. What we have often seen in our local communities, that lived reality is so starkly different. And with that speed data, actually, you know, Tina talked about our American Connection Corps. We'll actually have 6 communities here in Minnesota that will be part of that American Connection Corps. And I know up in War Road, one of the things that they're having done is actually doing, you know, rural organizing tactics of actually doing household canvassing and making sure that tribal communities, tribal households, rural households are actually taking these speed maps or speed tests as well, so that we can not have to rely on spotty data to be able to make the case that that's not lining up with our lived reality.
Mm-hmm. Benny, if I could just also, I wanted to opportunity for the people on this call to connect and step into this work. Yeah. Another thing, we talked at the top about what's unique about Minnesota, and we are unique, but we're not special, I guess as my mom would say, but is that we have here, yay us, a Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition. Okay, that thing doesn't just happen. That takes organizing. Jane Leonard's on the call. Thank you. Jane is a board member of the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition, and I thank you for your leadership there. And I invite all of you to pay attention. That's a way to aggregate our voice. The problem with this, Benya said this is very complicated. It is, it's intimidating. It's hard to step into this policy area. But what it's characterized by is an absence of public voice and public good. It's dominated by the industry. There are more AT&T lobbyists in St. Paul than any other industry. So they've got it going on. They have deep pockets and lots of advocacy capacity. What's missing is the voice of rural women and rural people and rural communities. Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition is our collective vehicle to share our voice and ensure that rural representatives and everybody in St. Paul is aware of public perspectives and a rural lived experience that we need public investment in broadband. So I urge all of you to check out, it's in the chat, the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition, and see that as a way to aggregate our rural voice in St. Paul.
Love it. And I'm gonna jump in here quick. I think just leading off of what Bernadine just shared with us, I want to move to Ann Tracy, who's joining us this morning, and Ann's going to share, just build on what Bernadine just shared and talk a little bit about the Women's March.
Yes, thanks, Teresa. Yeah, today I'm wearing my hat as a longtime volunteer for Women's March Minnesota. And as soon as we have a quiet week, we might announce that there's a new board and maybe I'm on it. So the other hat that I think most of you are used to me wearing is that I work as a consultant to the Blinded Foundation, and I write the Blinded on Broadband blog. So that's not the hat I'm wearing today. It's just convenient that I happen to have that knowledge about broadband. One of the things that we've been doing with the Women's March, we started about 6 weeks ago, is every other Tuesday, we meet virtually for something we like to call Time to Act. And we usually pick 4 bills or other actions that we prepare for folks, and we look up the information on the bills. We let folks know where it's standing in the process, and then we decide how we'd like people to act on that bill. We tell people who to contact, and we write up a little script. So this gave me an opportunity to do my homework in advance. Next Tuesday, we have this event. I'm going to, or I will forget to do this. I'm going to paste the information here.
I did pop it in, Anne.
Oh, you did. Thank you. Well, and here's even, I'm going to share my screen for a second.
Okay.
And one of the things that I've just sent. Okay, I've done this too long to not look what I need to know before. What we do in advance is we send people actually the script and the information in advance. Yeah, I just have too many windows open. Sorry, let me give me 1 second to get my head together there. So the one that I thought I would take a look at now is that broadband funding for the state. This is looking at state broadband funding. And what both the House and Senate have bills that have passed, essentially looking to fund the border-to-border grants. State funding that will support grants that build broadband to unserved and underserved areas. The status right now is that the Minnesota House has 30 million in their budget for grants. They just passed the Ag Omnibus bill last week. The Senate has 40 million for grants that passed the week before. They have a deal where they will actually are willing to spend up to 120 million for grants if federal funding becomes available. But what they have of state funding is that 40 million. The state also has some provisions adding wireless to the definition, and to when we start to look at maps, or fixed wireless, I should stop myself, adding fixed wireless. What that does is it allows us to say that we are all connected faster. It does not connect us at a higher speed any faster. It just kind of changes some of those parameters. A tiny bit on the background. Initially, both the House and the Senate had recommended $120 million for those broadband grants. That would be $60 million each year. And that each year is important because broadband's not an impulse purchase. It's something you need to plan for. So knowing that you've got that ongoing funding is an important thing. This is the amount that's been recommended by the Broadband Task Force. This is the amount that's been recommended by the Rural Broadband Coalition that we've been talking about. Where it stands right now is, as I said, they've passed in the House, it's passed in the Senate. Now it's gone to conference committee. So to affect change, to be heard, the essential thing is to contact some of these conference committee members. And you can see I've got a link to this PDF in the chat. I've got the names, I've got the email addresses, and I've got the phone numbers. If any of these folks are your representatives, and right below there, I've got a link so you can see who your representative is. I suspect this crowd knows, but if they are your rep, that's the best place to start. If you're only going to contact a few people, the co-chairs are also good, or you can extra credit bonus points, you can contact them all. I have a little script here. If you, or I was saying in the session, if you have a personal story, add it. And obviously a lot of people here do have personal stories. I have tied this to this being a women's issue, kind of bringing up some of the stats that I've already put in the chat. 55% of women had the net job loss due to the pandemic, and almost 70% of moms were the ones to leave their jobs during the pandemic due to a number of different reasons. So I've kind of we try to put a woman's spin on that. So when we do these, we kind of go through all of that a little slower, just a little slower than I've done right now. And then what we do is we won't do this now, put ourselves on mute, and it's super fun. We have a dozen or more of us make our phone calls. So I also want to take this opportunity to invite 100 rural women or more to join us. It's intense, but somebody came last week for their birthday. So it must be fun. But I will say you feel good about the stuff you do, because when you get off the phone, and even if, well, last week, I will say it's on Tuesday. So it was the day that they made the George Floyd verdict. And once we heard the verdict, we decided to move ahead with it. We had 10 people there. If each of them make 4 calls, there's 40 actions towards a purpose. If you have any topics that you'd like us to cover next Tuesday, please email me. Please join us. There's the information if you want to do something with it yourself. There you go. Now I can take a breath. That is much quicker than we normally do it. But it's something that we really do enjoy doing.
That is awesome.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you for the opportunity.
thank
And
you.
we really, really, really would like to have more rural women do this. So please,
Yeah.
please join us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne. And I think that's the piece is to, we want to lift up these webinars too, ways that you can act if you want to take action in those pieces. So those resources are there. And I know we're heading down to the end of our webinar and I want to be cognizant of time, but I do have one more question I'd like to throw in before I close to Bernadine and Tina. We try to always end our webinars with something positive. So when you think about COVID and we talk about all the terrible negative things that have happened with COVID, can you just name a couple things that you think have come out of COVID that are positive as far as for women in rural communities?
So I'll start with that. And I was thinking, and thank you, gave the question of as I was thinking about this, and I remember a moment last summer, early in the COVID response when we were all in lockdown, and Minnesota Public Radio for a couple of Fridays did a shared Minnesota song. Did any of you guys participate in? And I have this visceral memory on a Friday afternoon. It was summer, so I remember the sun in the kitchen. And boy, I'm gonna get emotional even remembering about it. They played "You've Got a Friend," and it was Carly Simon. And I cranked that up in my kitchen, and I put my phone out like this, and I whirled around the kitchen and danced and sang into it, singing "You Have a Friend," and imagining all of my people, my friends, my family, everywhere connecting. I do have to say that the whole globe going through that together made me feel connected to the human race in a way that I thought was unique in the world and in our moment. And the idea of the whole planet, the plane stopped flying. It felt like an opportunity to connect in a new way and to think about a new world in a new way. So I'm really grateful to the crack that it opened in what is to help us see through to what might be possible in a new world that we remake together.
Thanks,
Whoa.
Bernadine. How about you, Tina?
Hard to follow that. I feel guilty saying this, and it's such a mom thing to have mom guilt over a silver lining. My God, right? I have put my kids to bed myself every night, together with my husband, and we had a baby. We had these 3 little boys, and just never having to leave this baby, right? And who's now 18 months old. I've been working at the office this whole time, but to be able to go home at night and spend time and read the bedtime stories, and I got to do that, it has been so good for my family and my kids and me as a mom to not feel torn between my babies and my job and getting on a plane and going to see somebody for some meeting that really didn't matter at the end of the day. For me, it has been the gift of time.
Well, thank you. And I just want to thank you, Tina and Bernadine, for being with us today. And I want to thank Erica, Benya, and Rachel for facilitating. And just a couple quick things. We'll be following up on the website, all the links that were shared in the chat. We'll have that up there. We'll have the recording up there. Our next webinar is going to be a little tight. It's going to be May 12th, and we're going to be talking about the Initiators Fellowship. We're going to have 3 women who are enterprising entrepreneurs in rural Minnesota to talk about their experience as that program launches another round of funding. And also look for 100 Rural Women. We're going to be doing 100 meetings across the state, and we're kicking off June 8th in the Northeast. So more to come on that. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. And this was an incredible webinar. So thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions, and have a wonderful day, and check out the website for all the resources following. Thank you.